Hey everyone,
I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries, and welcome to the final episode of this 50-part series. Over the past 9 months, I have retraced my steps across Latin America. I have celebrated my 40th birthday one country at a time, and I have discovered one of the most fascinating regions of the planet. I have a stack of cards with categories on them, and throughout this episode I will be going through them, judging the best of Latin America and revealing my picks for the highlights of this journey. However, to begin with, it was time for one final journey, and it was a journey back to almost where it all began. My final leg would take me from Caulker in Belize to Cancun, Mexico, the city whose international airport would become my departure point from Latin America. To take this journey, you can head by boat back to Belize City and then go by bus up to the Belize-Mexico border, go through the border formalities, and then take another bus over to Cancun. Or you can simply take a boat across the ocean directly towards Mexico. Needless to say, I took the latter option. We left Caulker behind and sped across those impossibly turquoise Caribbean waters. Along the way, we stopped briefly at San Pedro in Belize. The town proudly claims to have inspired Madonna's La Isla Bonita, although Madonna herself has since said that the song wasn't based on any one particular island. Still, if the shoe fits, San Pedro would be the last place that I would visit in Belize. From there, we cleared Belizean immigration before heading out across international waters and eventually catching sight of the Mexican coastline. At Chetumal, there was the usual immigration paperwork, a not-so-small arrival fee, and a slightly stressful moment transferring money around. Thankfully, the immigration officer let me borrow his mobile hotspot long enough to complete the payment. After that, it was a taxi into town and one final ride aboard an ADO bus, destination Cancun. Okay, so here I have a stack of cards with categories and questions on them, which I will be answering about what I think were the best experiences and best things in Latin America. To start with, we are going through a category of places and nature. So, let's begin. Most underrated country, Chile or Uruguay or Honduras? It would be one of those three. I think Uruguay and Honduras, they were really great. I wasn't expecting how great they would be. But Chile, I think, considering how incredible I loved Chile. And considering all of that, and it doesn't quite have the profile of, say, Brazil or Mexico. Yeah. Biggest surprise, that would be Honduras, because I really didn't know what to expect from Honduras, but it wasn't that. I mean, Honduras was beautiful. I loved it. Country that I would live in for a year. Brazil. Brazil was so much fun. If I had a chance to live there for a year, I would. That would be, I would never forget that experience. Country that I would live in forever. Chile. Brazil, I could live in for a year, but I feel like if I lived there forever, I feel like my life would just stop. It would just be fun all the time. At least that's the impression I got. So yeah, country I'd live in forever, I'd say Chile. The country with the friendliest people, Colombia or Brazil? Brazil was a vibe. It was really fun. But Colombia, I even mentioned this in my video about Colombia, that I kept doing this. And it's true, in Colombia, I just felt like every time I met people, I walked away feeling like I had been with family. The people are just so kind. Most beautiful country? Chile is really beautiful, especially in the south, spectacular. Brazil had really beautiful coastline and the jungle, and Costa Rica, the forests, the rainforests, the cloud forests in Costa Rica are gorgeous. But for this one, I think I'm going to go Chile. Most culturally fascinating country? I would say Mexico, actually. In all of these countries, some more than others, in all of these countries, like when you go to each different region, the culture changes. But I felt that that was most true of Mexico. Best value for money. People say that Brazil is expensive to travel in, but I didn't think so. Especially out of the big cities, I felt that Brazil was pretty good value, actually, especially like up in the northeast. Colombia was also pretty good value. It helps if you speak Spanish. And pretty much all of Central America except for Costa Rica and Belize. This is the one that's going to get me cancelled. Biggest disappointment? Okay, so I think for this you need to know the context. And so before I went to Argentina, I had been in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro for Carnival. And from Rio de Janeiro Carnival, like the next day I flew to Buenos Aires. And Buenos Aires is an impressive city, but it reminded me a lot of Melbourne in Australia. It was quite grey, it was rainy, it was cold. And I think coming from Brazil and Carnival over to Argentina after that, I got to Argentina and I just, like, my mood just kind of dropped. So yeah, like biggest disappointment, I would say Argentina, but I feel like there's a lot of context around that. I think I need to go back and give Argentina a better shot, like another chance. Best city, Rio de Janeiro, but I need to mention some other ones here. Like I would say Oaxaca city in Mexico was awesome. So cool, like that. One of my favorite cities that I visited. Salvador in Brazil, Salvador de Bahia was like awesome. That really gave me a taste for Africa, actually. I think I need to travel to Africa. Mendoza in Argentina was pretty cool. I loved it there, actually. The climate, the mountains in the distance. Best capital city. The thing about Latin America is that I felt that the capital cities weren't the most amazing part of it. Mexico City, Lima had a really good food scene. Apart from that, in Latin America, like the best cities I felt were not the capitals. Like Rio de Janeiro is not the capital of Brazil. I had a great time in Cartagena, but that's not the capital of Colombia. Oaxaca is not the capital of Mexico. For this one, look, I would say La Paz in Bolivia, although it's kind of like it shares the status of capital city with Sucre. Those cable cars climbing up the mountainside and everything, that was just like, it feels like La Paz exists at odds with reality, and that was pretty impressive. Best small town. Jericoacoara in Brazil was that was a vibe. Like, that was so cool. I visited so many small towns. Salento in Colombia, but like around there, like the Valle de Cocora was pretty cool. Yeah, that's a difficult one. Frutillar in Chile, I thought that was really quaint, like down by the lake. I'd probably have to say Jericoacoara. Best beach. I would say Jericoacoara again. There were amazing beaches on Otila Island in Honduras. Caye Caulker in Belize was beautiful. But in Jericoacoara, like, the beach is just, it's spectacular and it's so long. Like, there's so much to it, and you can walk over to other beaches and so on. So yeah, I'd say Jericoacoara again. Best island. See, I visited so many different types of islands while I was there. Like, I had the Caribbean islands with Isla Holbox in Mexico, Utila and Caye Caulker. And then I did the Galapagos Islands, which was more of like a wildlife experience. And then I was also on like Isla del Sol and in Bolivia, and Chiloé in Chile, which are very cultural experiences, but in different ways. So of all of them, I'd probably have to say Galapagos, because it's just like being out there in the middle of the Pacific and all these weird animals around. Yeah. Although Isla Holbox was, like, for a beach holiday, Isla Holbox was just great. I loved it there. And in terms of like Caribbean beach islands, I'd probably say Isla Holbox in Mexico. Best national park. Anywhere in the Amazon or around Iguazu Falls was impressive. But for this one, I would say Manuel Antonio National Park in Costa Rica, because the sheer abundance of wildlife that is just like there in front of you. I didn't really see it quite like that anywhere else. Best archaeological site. Isla del Sol had a vibe about it, but it wasn't as impressive as some of the other ones I saw. Some of the Mayan sites in Central America, like Palenque, Yaxchilan, Copan, and Tikal. But I think for this one, it needs to be Machu Picchu in Peru. Like, even though it rained the whole time I was there, it was still great. Like, it doesn't, that was like a dream come true. So bucket list item ticked off. Best museum. This would either be the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City or the Museum of, I forget the name of it, but I think it's like the Memory of Dictatorship Museum in Santiago in Chile. Considering the subject matter, it was so tastefully done and I learned a lot. Best volcano. I wouldn't say Cerro Negro, which I did the volcano surfing on. That was an amazing experience, but the volcano itself wasn't as impressive. It wasn't as impressive as, say, Volcan Osorno in Chile. And like to see Volcan Osorno, it's like this perfect cone and it's like imposing across the lake, viewed from Frutillar or Puerto Varas in Chile. Best lake. Lago Atitlan in Guatemala was cool. Really beautiful, surrounded by volcanoes. Lake Janquihue, I think it was called, in Chile. Where Frutillar and Volcán Osorno are. That was really beautiful. And Lake Titicaca. Let's say for this one, Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. The other ones were amazing, but that was like, I mean, it's like this lake on the roof of the world, and we had to take our bus on a ship across the lake. Best waterfall, Iguazu Falls, hands down. Best rainforest or jungle. Costa Rica's rainforests are awesome, but I mean, I took a boat down the Amazon, so it's the Amazon, of course. Best road trip or scenic drive. Driving from Salta in Argentina over the Andes to San Pedro de Atacama was epic. Some of the Jeep rides that I took with Willie's Jeeps through Eje Cafetero, like, they were so beautiful. And I'm so glad that they haven't actually put like motorways through that region, because it wouldn't be the same. But I think for this one, the best road trip would have to be the entire journey over to Uyuni in Bolivia, with Amit and Eber, our driver. I mean, that was just epic. That's once in a lifetime kind of stuff. Best hostel. This would be Aquarela do Leme in Rio de Janeiro, without a doubt. That hostel, it felt like a backpacker's resort, and like breakfast was included. The facilities were amazing. The beds were comfortable. It was super clean. There was a real backpacker vibe about it. And we had this view from our rooms over Copacabana Beach. What more could you ask for? Best UNESCO World Heritage Site. Machu Picchu in Peru. The old cities of Cartagena and in Colombia and Antigua in Guatemala were really pretty. And Torres del Paine in the south of, like in Patagonia, in Chile and Patagonia. Iguazu Falls. I'm going to put Torres del Paine in Chile for this one, because I don't know that I'm going to get to mention it elsewhere in this. Best wildlife encounter. Easily, when I was on the Galapagos Islands, I was walking just along a road to see some caves in the inland part of Isla Santa Cruz that I was staying on, and a giant tortoise just walked out in front of me. Like, incredible. Best snorkeling. Utila Island in Honduras. I also snorkeled in Caulker in Belize and on the Galapagos Islands, but on Utila Island, it's just so within reach. Like, I dived in from a bar where I had gotten a drink, and there was a stingray right there in the ocean. Best bird life. Galapagos Islands, for the sheer like variety of birds that I saw there, but also I would give an honorable mention to Mindo in Ecuador, because I saw lots of hummingbirds there for the very first time. It was at the Butterfly Sanctuary. Best sunrise. Both of them would be in Brazil, and it would either be João Pessoa being the first person on the entire American continent to watch the sunrise that morning, or it would be in Rio de Janeiro, where I had been out all night with friends, and then we all ended up on the beach and were watching the sunrise over Copacabana Beach. But yeah, one or the other. Best sunset. Okay, so I saw lots of sunsets while I was traveling. Cartagena for New Year, like watching the last sunset of 2024 in Cartagena. That was like really evocative. The last sunset that I watched of my holiday at Caye Caulker, Huacachina, was unexpected. But then I also watched two really great sunsets over the ocean from Isla Holbox, which was like vivid, and also from Jericoacoara. So probably one of those two. The sunset that I watched from Punta Balcones in Peru, that was like one of my farewells to Latin America. I had crossed the Andes by that point, and I watched the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, the last person on the South American continent to watch the sunset that day. Last one. The best night sky. I had a really great experience in Jericoacoara when I was with some friends. We'd had dinner and a couple of drinks, and then we went down to the beach and we walked out into the water, turned around and looked back at the town, and it was just like this flawless sky above us. That was beautiful. But I think for this one, the winner has to be in San Pedro de Atacama, when I just walked out from the hotel and then I got out like sort of onto the outskirts of the town, laid down on a sand dune and looked up, and like the entire Milky Way just revealed itself in front of me. Amazing. Walking into the ADO bus station in Cancun was slightly surreal. I had this weird feeling because I'd been there 8 months earlier on my way through Cancun, on my way south to South America, because I passed through Cancun when I took my flight to Medellin in Colombia. And so when I got back into this bus station, it sort of felt like so much had happened, but it felt like it had been a really short time as well since I'd been there. I can't really explain it. It was like this familiar place that I knew so well, but it was as if I had just popped out to South America and then ducked back in. It was a really strange feeling. When I got to Cancun, I met up with a good friend of mine, Tom, who lives in Mexico, and we'd been in touch throughout the trip and organized to rent an Airbnb in Cancun and spend the last week together. One of the things that we had talked about doing was to visit Tulum, which was an important Mayan site that I had missed on my first time through Mexico. To get there, we took an ADO bus south to the town of Tulum and then went through a fairly convoluted process in order to get to the ruins, but in the end we got in there. Tulum is one of the great cities built by the Maya, and because it remained occupied relatively late into the civilization's history, much of it is remarkably well preserved. Monitor lizards wandered lazily through the ruins, and beyond the ancient stone walls lay the brilliant turquoise Caribbean Sea. Except due to a tropical storm that had just passed through, the sea wasn't exactly turquoise, it was more like a muddy brown color. This place is also thought to have been one of the first major Mayan cities seen by Europeans approaching the Yucatan coast by sea more than 500 years ago. Standing there, looking out over the same coastline, it was hard not to think about how much history this place has witnessed. Interestingly though, after some of the Mayan ruins that I had seen, including Palenque, Yaxchilan, even Chichen Itza, which was a little underwhelming if I'm honest, Copan in Honduras and Tikal in Guatemala, Tulum felt a little bit underwhelming, and I can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe I was just tired at the end of the trip, but then Tom felt the same way too. I think we'd sort of expected more. Maybe this is like one of those places that is really hyped up because Tulum is kind of quite a popular destination in what's called the Riviera Maya, this part of Mexico. So maybe this is sort of a place that a lot of people visit, the people that can't get to Guatemala or Honduras. I'm not sure, maybe our expectations were just a little bit too high. It was great, but it just wasn't what we had thought it would be. Still, it's a wonderfully organized archaeological site, and it's one that's absolutely worth visiting if you're in the area. Back in Tulum town, I bought the final charm for my bracelet, a tiny cactus. Fittingly, it represented Mexico, the country where this entire journey had begun. From there, we headed out to Gran Cenote. Now, I had visited cenotes before, but not one where you get to swim with turtles. That alone made it unforgettable. Crystal clear water, sunlight streaming down through the limestone and vines, and turtles gliding silently beneath us. It was the perfect final adventure. And it was a reminder that after 9 months on the road, Latin America still had the capacity to surprise and wow me. Okay, next round is backpacker life. Best national dish. It has to be tacos or ceviche. Like, I had great food everywhere, but tacos in Mexico or ceviche in Peru, it's just the best. Best street food. I mean, tacos in Mexico are great, but I've already included them as the best national food. Completos in Chile. I mean, it's literally a hot dog with avocado on it. What's not to like? Coxinha in Brazil. And the other thing was that lime and coconut drink that I tried with Kevin, the French traveler that I met in Salvador de Bahia. That was really nice. And also, I think it was called Cocora or something, but it was basically the coconut candy thing that Ulysses bought for me on the streets of Bucaramanga just a few days before Christmas. That was just like, oh my God, where has this been all my life? Best dessert. Latin America does desserts really well. Anything with dulce de leche in it is great. The cakes that I had, especially in Chile, like Pato introduced me to some incredible cakes while I was there. But I think for this one, I'm going to say Brigadeiro from Brazil. I mean, it's like chocolate condensed milk truffles. Or alfajores in Uruguay and Argentina. They're like this sweet biscuit filled with whatever you want. I know they're more of a snack, but I could have them for dessert. Best coffee, Colombia. Although I would say that Colombia doesn't really have as much of a cafe culture as the coffee is of excellent quality, but a lot of the time that coffee is brewed in people's homes. So I think that's what people might misjudge about Colombia a little bit. But yeah, Colombia. Best bakery item. The pan de muertos, which is like the bread for the Day of the Dead in Mexico, was really delicious. It's like this orange infused sweet bread. It was delicious. It was so good. The other thing I would say is that I went to lots of nice bakeries in Brazil for breakfast where they would prepare beijos, which are tapioca pancakes. So they were really nice. Fun fact, Portuguese, at least Brazilian Portuguese, doesn't really have a word for breakfast. It does exist in Old Portuguese, but usually they just talk about café de mañana, which is morning coffee. Best restaurant or cafe? Café Quindío in Colombia, especially if you're in the Eje Cafetero when you're there, because it's a chain. They have outlets across the country, I believe. Juan Valdez is pretty cool in Colombia as well. Or the cafe that I went to every morning in Sao Paulo. I forget the name of it, but I'm going to put it on the screen here. And that cafe, I met the owner, and he used to get artists in to design cups for the cafe and so on. And the coffee was delicious too. I think I need to turn these around so that they're the right way when I pick them up. Like that. Most unusual food. Colombia takes the cake for weird combinations of food. And sometimes it works and sometimes not so much. But I would say that the weirdest food that I tasted on my entire trip, no doubt, was hormigas culonas, which are fried ants from Santander, which is where Bucaramanga is. I was given some of them by Vita and Ulysses in Bucaramanga for Christmas, but I actually ended up tasting them weeks later in Cali with my friend Fabian. So yeah, no doubt the weirdest or most unusual food I tasted. But in terms of things that I could eat more regularly, I would say maybe like chocolate con queso. So in Colombia, putting lumps of cheese into hot chocolate in place of marshmallows. It's strange, but it works. It's good. Easiest country to travel in. Mexico and Costa Rica are really well set up for travelers. So I would say those two. Like, it's just, there are countries where maybe there are more options to take buses or, like that kind of thing. But in terms of like just being ready for tourists, I would say Mexico or Costa Rica. Okay, so best local transport. For this, I would say Brazil or Colombia, because in Brazil and Colombia, although it's not as well set up for travelers, it really helps if you speak Spanish or Portuguese in those places. But just the options that you have to get places, there are lots of buses going different directions, lots of flights going different places. It's just really easy to get around those places if you're willing to speak the local language and spend a little bit of money. But yeah. And also you often meet people on those journeys in Brazil and Colombia and they become friends. Best backpacker vibe. Look, there's a real backpacker trail that goes through Central America, and a lot of it sort of focuses on certain places. And one of those places where it all sort of comes together is in the Yucatan Peninsula, and especially in Merida. So that had a really good vibe. I stayed at the Caye hostel in Merida, and that was like a real center for backpackers. Otherwise, I would say Brazil's northeast. Like, I'm not much of a beach bum, but that was beach bum central, and I had fun. Like, and you meet people, and you know, everyone's sort of moving along and beach hopping, and then you see people that you've seen at the other beach, but then now they're in the next destination. Best place to slow down? I think I've just answered that. That's Brazil's northeast. I mean, if you just want to bliss out on a beach and do nothing. Safest feeling country. So I'm making a reel about this at the moment, actually, and I didn't really feel unsafe anywhere in South America or in Latin America except for Rio de Janeiro during Carnival. And even then, I didn't really feel like I was in a lot of danger. I just felt like I needed to keep my wits about me. In terms of the safest feeling country, I think Uruguay was the one where I felt like I least needed to be on guard while I was traveling around. Most adventurous country. Bolivia and Honduras. Bolivia, because even though a lot of tourists go there, it just feels out there. Like, it feels wild, and it's high altitude, and it's rough traveling, and like, yeah, so that. And especially like out in the wilderness of the southwest of Bolivia, between the Chilean border and Uyuni, it feels adventurous. And Honduras. Honduras, not because it's super adventurous, but there just aren't that many tourists there, and everyone had told me about, you know, that it was going to be dangerous and so on. And when I got there, I mean, it didn't feel that bad, but it did feel like I was off the beaten track. Best digital detox destination. I mean, in the wilderness of Bolivia, it was pretty hard to get internet access. Brazil's northeast is, I mean, it's well connected to the internet and, you know, the online world, but you could really just disconnect and bliss out on the beach. And maybe Chiloé in Chile, like, they have internet access, but it still feels like you're sort of stepping back in time and, you know, away from that world a little bit. If you've been enjoying this journey, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to my channel. And if you really like what you're seeing, please consider sharing it on your social media and telling your family and friends about what I'm doing here. It really builds a bit of a community around my YouTube channel. It helps me grow the channel, and I'd love to have them along for the ride. That evening, we headed back to Cancun and celebrated the only way that Cancun knows how, and that is with a night out on the town. The following morning, before heading to the airport, Tom and I made one final stop at the beach. We brought along a tres leches cake, perhaps the most iconic dessert in Latin America, and celebrated the final installment of my 40th birthday. As the sun rose over the Caribbean, we sat there eating cake and listening to the waves, and reflecting on everything that had happened over the previous 9 months. And once again, it's difficult to explain exactly how this felt. I didn't feel sentimental or emotional. I sort of felt like completely at peace and accomplished. It was like, after 9 months on the road, there was nothing left to prove and nowhere to rush to. It was just, I was there in the moment, and the circle was complete. It was magical. Soon afterwards, it was time to head to the airport. I said goodbye to Tom, checked in, and boarded my flight out of Latin America. And just like that, it was all over. 9 months, 17 countries, nearly 68,000 kilometers traveled, hundreds of buses, countless hostels, volcanoes, jungles, deserts, glaciers, rainforests, and Caribbean islands, and memories that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Okay, so I have the final set here, and these are the big awards, the final countdown. So, favorite travel day. Look, certain days stand out. New Year in Cartagena was a vibe. The Day of the Dead in Mexico, in Pátzcuaro, that entire day, like getting from Morelia to Pátzcuaro and then the whole experience. Going around Valparaiso with Pato and his friends, that was lots of fun. The day that I got off the boat in the Amazon and I spent the day walking around Belém in the north of Brazil with Ney. Yeah, they were all really, really like vivid memories of mine. Most unforgettable accommodation. Aquarela do Leme in Brazil was awesome. It was unforgettable. Morelia in Mexico, where I locked myself out of the Airbnb. But despite that, that was a really, really nice place to stay. Nice enough that I made a reel to advertise it. The Salt Palace in Uyuni was unforgettable. The hammock plantation near Playa El Tunco, I think it was Playa El Palmacito, in El Salvador. Not such an amazing place to stay, but just like the vibe, like these hammocks out in the rainforest and the swimming pool up the back. And then Sao Paulo as well. I was there for a week and the accommodation wasn't great, but the people in the hostel really made it. It was hilarious. Biggest wow moment. I think cenotes in Mexico, they really wowed me. Every time I got to them, and I went to many of them, but every time I got to them, I was impressed. La Paz in Bolivia was just like this impossible city, which really, it's difficult to explain, but like the entire city just exists at like this 90-degree angle to reality. But I think the one that takes the cake here is Iguazu Falls. It's only happened twice in my life that I've actually walked up to something or experienced something and like had tears in my eyes without even really noticing because of the beauty that I was witnessing. And Iguazu Falls was that. Funniest travel moment. Amit and I still joke about the American guy who talked about the bird in Ushuaia, who was like, oh, it's like a chicken and a hawk.
Chicken hawk.
The Brazilian ladies at the sand dunes in Lençóis Maranhenses, they were so lovely and we just like laughed the entire time. And some of the things that happened at the Sao Paulo hostel, like when the guy across from me fell through his bunk onto the bunk below, that was, I mean, it wasn't so funny for him, but it was hilarious for us. And also Rio de Janeiro with Will, like some of the jokes that we had, I remember, I don't know even where this came up from, but I remember something being said about, you know, like 2 beers and a hamburger equals upper thigh. Don't ask. Most emotional moment. I think Iguazu Falls was emotional in terms of its beauty, but I think for me, leaving Chile and going to Bolivia, because at that point I knew that a lot of like the big sort of social things were behind me. So I had been to the Day of the Dead in Mexico. I had been through Colombia. I'd spent Christmas. I had been to Carnival in Rio de Janeiro, and then I had met up with Amit and then traveled with him for a bit, and then had like friends with like Edna in Santiago, Nacho in Frutillar, and Pato in Cancun. And then moving on from that, and I knew that the road ahead was going to be completely alone. I think it was a bit of a realization for me, and it took me a while to get back into that groove again. The place that changed my perspective, Brazil or Belize? Brazil, because I'll confess, before going there, I was just like, look, it's going to be amazing, but I don't speak Portuguese, and it's just like jungle and beaches and parties. But like when I got there, I didn't realize how much fun could be had at jungles and beaches and parties. So like it is all of that and more. So Brazil was like a real grower in terms of my perspective about the country. I loved it. And Belize, because I think I'd always had a bit of a cringe idea about traveling in the Caribbean, like sort of thinking it was a bit, you know, Club Tropicana kind of thing. And when I got there, I mean, there's a reason why the Caribbean's so popular and everyone raves about it. It is that beautiful. A place I almost skipped, but I loved. Huacachina in Peru, I almost skipped, but I loved it. And I would say the same for the entire country of Honduras. Really, the big one here would be Patagonia, because I almost didn't go there because it was going to be so much more expensive, and I'd already been south, so and then returned north again. So did I really need to travel all the way south again? But yeah, it was so worth it. El Calafate in Argentina. That was one of the highlights of Argentina, and it came right at the end. The place that I wished that I had stayed in longer, Peru, no doubt. I really neglected Peru in terms of my itinerary. I really wish that I could have spent longer there. Okay, we're getting down to the final few here. Favorite birthday celebration? Look, anywhere where I had a bunch of good friends around me. So like I think about my last day in Bogota where I was with Javi and a whole bunch of other friends there. Cancun with Pato and his family. Sao Paulo, where my friend Milene, to whom I am forever grateful, had organized a party with her friends to like introduce me to them and sort of be welcome to Sao Paulo and happy birthday. Anything like that was all up there. Edna at the Revolving Restaurant in Santiago with Amit, and Tom in Cancun that morning at the beach with the Tres Leches cake. Bucaramanga and Ocaña. I mean, Vita and Ulysses, they put on a show and they did it twice in a week. Like, amazing. And then I would also, like, I think special mention goes to Tino and his family in Palenque, because that was the first time that I'd brought a cake to a family that I was staying with and who I didn't really know that well. I'd met them through couch surfing and they really got into the spirit, and it was so much fun. And yeah, like to all of you, if you're watching this now, then thank you all so much, because you really made my 40th birthday celebration, continuous year-long celebration, you made it what it was. Favorite charm bracelet souvenir? I really love the ones from Honduras and Brazil because they're colorful, but I think I would have to say Colombia. It's the accordion, and that's because of the story attached to it when I went shopping and searching for that in the markets of Bucaramanga with Vitelma that evening. I hadn't thought about getting an accordion for Colombia. I was thinking maybe like a coffee cup or something. But then at that point, I had already played or tried unsuccessfully to play the accordion at Vita and Eolice's place on Christmas Eve. So that sort of has like a memory attached to it as well as a story. Was traveling Latin America for 9 months everything I hoped it would be? Yes, and more. My top 10 moments. This is so difficult. I mean, I don't know that I can choose 10. Breakfast in the ocean in Sisal, Yaxchilan and Palenque, but especially Yaxchilan, like going through the jungle to get to a Mayan site out there. Going into the cenotes on the Yucatan Peninsula. Christmas in Bucaramanga, the Carnaval de Negros y Blancos. New Year's Eve in Cartagena with Juliana and her family. Sleeping in a hammock for 4 nights and 5 days, traveling on a boat down the Amazon. Candles night with Danilo's family at the hostel in Alcalá. Volcano surfing, of course. The Day of the Dead in Mexico. The Day of the Dead in Pátzcuaro in Mexico, but then also that very first day in Mexico City where I was up on top of a bus going down the center of the city with Andrea. I mean, unforgettable, and what a welcome to Latin America. The giant tortoises in Galapagos Islands, Carnival in Rio, Machu Picchu, Uyuni, the sunset in Punta Balcones in Peru. No, I can't choose 10. My top 4 countries. I've thought about this and they are for different reasons. So Brazil, because it was just dreamlike. Chile for the natural beauty. The south of Chile, Patagonia, is just insane. Colombia, because everyone was just so loving and so beautiful. And Mexico, because that's the country that I have to go back to and explore much more. I feel like 6 weeks in Mexico, I only just scratched the surface. And I mean, 6 weeks is not enough to discover everything in every country, but I especially felt that for Mexico. Close runners up, I would say Uruguay, because it was just fun and cool, and Costa Rica. The one place that everyone should visit, I would say Rio de Janeiro during Carnival. I mean, you hear about it, so I think everyone should go there at least once in their life and, yeah, experience it. What's next? I think I've already kind of hinted at this, but I think for me, either I really got a taste for Africa and the Caribbean. Africa from Salvador de Bahia in Brazil, and the Caribbean from Honduras and Belize. And yeah, I think that they're next. Last one. Would I do it all over again? Yeah, 1,000,000 times over.